The silence in the Zephyrian War Council chamber was thick enough to cut with a plasma blade. Admiral Kethvar stood before the holographic display, showing the smoking remains of what had once been the thriving human colony of New Eden. The orbital bombardment had been complete, surgical and devastating. Every structure reduced to ash, every life extinguished in a matter of hours. The insects have been dealt with, Kethvar announced to the assembled council members, his forearms folding across his chitinous chest with satisfaction. Their pathetic settlement is nothing but dust now. The Zephyrian Empire had been expanding across the galaxy for 3,000 years, crushing every species that dared to stand in their way. Humans were just another obstacle, another primitive race that had stumbled into space travel and thought they could claim worlds that belonged to the Empire. The council members clicked their mandibles in approval, their compound eyes gleaming with predatory satisfaction. "How many of the vermin were eliminated?" asked Councillor Vrext, her voice carrying the characteristic buzz that all Zephyrians possessed. "Approximately 50,000, Kethvar replied, manipulating the hologram to show the before and after images. Men, women, children, all of them. The colony was completely defenseless, just as our intelligence predicted. What the Zephyrians didn't know was that New Eden had been more than just another human settlement. It had been a research colony, home to some of humanity's brightest minds working on terraforming technology. Families had lived there for generations, building something beautiful from a barren world. Children had played in gardens that their grandparents had planted. Art galleries had displayed works that captured the human spirit of hope and perseverance. The attack had come without warning. Zephyrian destroyers had dropped out of hyperspace and opened fire immediately. The colony's modest defensive grid had lasted exactly 47 seconds before being overwhelmed. Emergency broadcasts had gone out, but there had been no time for evacuation. The bombardment had been merciless and complete. In the depths of space, automated distress beacons continued to transmit their final messages. Video logs of families saying goodbye to each other. Scientists desperately trying to preserve their research data. Teachers shielding their students as the world burned around them. These signals would eventually reach human space, carrying with them the documentation of an atrocity that would change everything. But in the Zephyrian Council chamber, there was only celebration. They had eliminated another human foothold in what they considered their rightful territory. The Empire's expansion would continue unimpeded, or so they believed. "What about the other human colonies in this sector?" asked another counselor. "We'll deal with them one by one," Kethvar assured them. "These creatures breed quickly, but they die just as fast. Their technology is primitive, their ships are slow, and their weapons are laughably weak. The Empire has nothing to fear from humanity." The Admiral had studied the intelligence reports extensively. Humans were a young species, barely 3 centuries into space travel. Their ships were indeed slower than Zephyrian vessels, their weapons less powerful, their armor thinner. They seemed to rely heavily on cooperation and mutual aid rather than the superior strength and ruthless efficiency that had made the Zephyrian Empire the dominant force in the galaxy. What Kethvar and his council failed to understand was that they had just made the biggest mistake in the history of their species. They had attacked civilians. They had murdered children. They had crossed a line that no species had ever crossed with humanity and survived to tell about it. In the outer rim of human space, long-range sensors were already detecting the aftermath of the attack. Emergency protocols were being activated across dozens of human worlds. Military commanders were being awakened from sleep to receive reports that would make their blood run cold. Scientists were analyzing the energy signatures of the weapons used. Politicians were convening emergency sessions, and somewhere deep in the classified sections of human military installations, certain files were being opened for the first time in decades. The Zephyrians had just learned something that every other species in the galaxy either knew instinctively or had learned through bitter experience. There are predators and there are prey, but sometimes if you push the prey hard enough, if you hurt them badly enough, they stop running and start hunting. Humanity was about to remind the galaxy why they had never truly been prey at all. They had simply been sleeping. Captain Sarah Chen stood in the command center of the UES Vigilance, her hands gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The holographic display showed the same devastating images that had shattered the hearts of billions of humans across known space. New Eden, once a jewel of human terraforming achievement, was nothing but cooling slag and ash. "Ma'am, we're receiving priority transmissions from Earth Central Command," reported Lieutenant Torres, his voice barely steady. "Operation Dragon's Wake has been authorized." Chen felt a chill run down her spine. Dragon's Wake wasn't just a military operation. It was humanity's most classified contingency plan. Every human officer above the rank of commander knew the name, but few knew the details. It was the protocol designed for only one scenario: the complete genocide of human civilians by an alien species. "How long since the attack?" Chen asked, though she already knew the answer. 36 hours, ma'am. The distress beacons went silent 14 hours ago. Across human space, similar scenes were playing out on hundreds of ships and stations. Admiral Marcus Kane, the grizzled veteran who had spent 40 years keeping the peace between various alien species, was now reading deployment orders that he had hoped never to see. Captain Liu Wei was pulling his stealth reconnaissance ship away from a routine patrol to begin a very different kind of mission. Commander Yuki Tanaka was overseeing the activation of weapons systems that had been kept in storage for decades, waiting for a war that everyone had hoped would never come. The Zephyrians had made their calculations based on humanity's known military capabilities. They had observed human ships engaging in border skirmishes with pirates and rogue states. They had seen humanity's defensive wars against the occasional aggressive neighbor. What they had never seen was humanity when the gloves came off completely. "Signal all vessels in the sector," Chen ordered. "Begin immediate reconnaissance of all Zephyrian positions. I want to know where every ship, every base, every listening post is located. And get me a direct line to the intelligence division. We need everything they have on Zephyrian biology, psychology, and military doctrine." The response was swift and comprehensive. Within hours, human ships that had been conducting peaceful exploration and trade missions were transforming into something else entirely. Cargo holds that had carried medical supplies and food were being retrofitted to house weapons that most of the galaxy had never seen. Research vessels were deploying sensor arrays that could track a whisper in the void of space. Dr. Jennifer Nakamura, the leading expert on alien psychology at the University of Alpha Centauri, received a call that pulled her away from her morning lecture on interspecies diplomacy. Within 12 hours, she was aboard a military transport heading for the front lines, carrying files that contained detailed psychological profiles of every major alien species humanity had encountered. "The Zephyrians are apex predators in their natural environment," she explained to Admiral Kane during their first briefing. "They've never faced serious opposition in their 3,000 years of expansion. They view other species as either resources to be exploited or obstacles to be eliminated. They have no concept of mercy because they've never needed it." Kane nodded grimly. "And they've never faced anything like us before." "Exactly. Their intelligence reports will show them our standard military capabilities. But they have no frame of reference for what happens when humans are truly motivated. They don't understand that we don't just fight wars. We solve problems. And right now they've made themselves a problem that needs solving." The Zephyrian Empire controlled over 200 star systems, but their expansion had made them overconfident and spread thin. Their military doctrine relied on overwhelming initial force, followed by occupation with minimal garrison forces. They had never needed to defend their territory because no one had ever been foolish enough to attack them directly. Meanwhile, in the depths of human space, ancient protocols were being activated. The Dragon Corps, an elite unit that existed only in the most classified files, was being mobilized for the first time in its history. These weren't just soldiers. They were the culmination of centuries of human military evolution, trained for scenarios that most people couldn't even imagine. Colonel David Reyes, the Dragon Corps commander, stood before his assembled team of 300 of the most dangerous humans alive. They were specialists in impossible missions, experts in turning the enemy's strengths into weaknesses, and masters of the kind of warfare that left no witnesses to tell tales. "Gentlemen and ladies," Reyes began, his voice carrying the weight of history, "we've been given a simple mission. The Zephyrian Empire has just learned that there are consequences for murdering human civilians. Our job is to teach them exactly what those consequences are." The galaxy was about to learn something new about humanity. They were about to discover that the peaceful explorers and traders they had grown accustomed to were just one face of a species that had climbed to the top of the food chain on a death world, and had never forgotten how to hunt. 3 weeks after the destruction of New Eden, Admiral Kethvar was beginning to feel the first stirrings of unease. The expected human response had been notably absent. No desperate diplomatic communications, no threats of retaliation, no massing of their primitive fleet for a doomed counterattack. Instead, there had been only silence from human space, as if the entire species had simply vanished. Perhaps they're finally learning their place, suggested Counselor Vrexth during their morning briefing. The destruction of their colony may have taught them the futility of opposing us. Kethvar wasn't so sure. His intelligence network, extensive as it was, had been reporting strange anomalies. Human trade ships had stopped arriving at neutral stations. Their diplomatic vessels had ceased all contact with other species. Most disturbing of all, several Zephyrian listening posts near human territory had gone silent without explanation. "Send a patrol to investigate the missing outposts," he ordered his aide. Something isn't right. What Kethvar didn't know was that his missing outposts were now nothing but floating debris, eliminated by human stealth ships that moved like ghosts through space. The crews had vanished without a trace, and the installations had been methodically destroyed to prevent any distress signals from being sent. Captain Liu Wei piloted his reconnaissance vessel through the wreckage of the former Zephyrian listening post at Kepler 442. His ship, the Shadow's Edge, was a masterpiece of human engineering specifically designed for operations that officially didn't exist. Its hull absorbed sensor sweeps like a black hole swallowed light, and its weapons could disable enemy systems without leaving evidence of what had caused the malfunction. "Clean sweep," reported his tactical officer. "All data cores recovered, personnel eliminated, and the station's destruction staged to look like a reactor malfunction." Liu nodded, already plotting a course to their next target. The Dragon Corps had provided them with a comprehensive list of Zephyrian military installations, and they were working through it with methodical precision. Each strike was carefully planned to look like an accident or equipment failure, maintaining the illusion that humanity was still reeling from the attack on New Eden. Meanwhile, in the heart of Zephyrian space, a different kind of infiltration was taking place. Dr. Yuki Sato, one of humanity's premier xenobiologists, had spent 2 years living among various alien species as part of a cultural exchange program. What none of her hosts knew was that she was also Colonel Yuki Sato of the Dragon Corps, and her research had involved mapping every aspect of Zephyrian society, military structure, and biological vulnerabilities. Now she was putting that knowledge to use. The biological weapon she had developed was a masterpiece of precision engineering, designed to target specific genetic markers found only in Zephyrian DNA. It would remain dormant for weeks, spreading silently through their population via their food and water supply, before activating simultaneously across their entire empire. But the weapon wasn't designed to kill. That would have been too quick, too merciful. Instead, it would systematically shut down their ability to process certain proteins, leaving them weak, confused, and unable to maintain their military readiness. The Zephyrian Empire would collapse not in a blaze of glory, but in a whimper of biological inevitability. Phase 1 deployment complete, Sato reported through an encrypted quantum channel. The pathogen has been introduced to 17 major Zephyrian worlds through their water treatment facilities. Activation will occur in 42 days. On Earth, in a bunker buried 3 kilometers beneath the surface, General Patricia Hayes coordinated the largest military operation in human history. The walls of her command center were lined with displays showing the real-time positions of over 2,000 human vessels, all moving into carefully calculated positions throughout Zephyrian space. Dragon Corps has eliminated 70% of their deep space monitoring network, reported Colonel Martinez. Their military leadership still has no idea we're coming. What about their main battle fleet? Hayes asked. Admiral Kane's task force is in position to intercept them at the Vega system. The Zephyrians have concentrated most of their heavy units there, expecting us to try a direct assault on their border worlds. Hayes smiled coldly. The Zephyrians were thinking like predators, which was exactly what humanity was counting on. Predators expected their prey to either run or fight desperately from a position of weakness. They didn't expect their prey to have been planning this moment for decades, waiting for someone to give them an excuse to reveal what they really were. Signal all units, Hayes commanded. Begin Phase 2. Show them what dragons look like when they wake up. Across the galaxy, human ships that had been hiding in the void for weeks suddenly came alive. Stealth systems disengaged, weapons powered up, and engines roared to life as the largest fleet in human history emerged from the darkness. They moved with a precision that spoke of years of planning and preparation, converging on Zephyrian positions with mathematical certainty. The dragons were awake, and they were very, very angry. Admiral Kethvar was reviewing reports in his private quarters when the first alarms began to sound. Emergency lights bathed his chambers in pulsing red, as his communication system crackled to life with panicked transmissions from across the Empire. "Admiral, we're under attack. Human ships are everywhere." "Sir, they've destroyed the entire Kepler garrison. Unknown vessels are jamming our communications. We can't coordinate a response." Kethvar rushed to his command center, his forearms trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. The tactical display showed red markers appearing throughout Zephyrian space like a spreading infection. Human ships were attacking simultaneously across dozens of star systems, striking with a coordination that should have been impossible for such a primitive species. "How many ships are we facing?" he demanded. We don't know, sir," stammered his aide. "They appear to have been hiding throughout our territory for weeks. Our estimates range from 500 to over 2,000 vessels." Kethvar stared at the display in growing horror. This wasn't a desperate counterattack by a grieving species. This was a calculated campaign of extermination, planned and executed with a cold precision that made his chitinous skin crawl. He was beginning to realize that humanity's apparent weakness had been nothing more than a mask. And underneath that mask lay something that his species had never encountered before. They had awakened something that had been sleeping in the darkness, something that remembered how to hunt. The Battle of Vega Prime lasted exactly 17 minutes. Admiral Marcus Kane watched from the bridge of the UES Retribution as the Zephyrian main fleet, once the terror of the galaxy, was systematically dismantled by human forces that seemed to anticipate their every move. "Target the command ship's communication array," Kane ordered calmly, his voice carrying none of the emotion that burned in his chest. "I want their admiral to watch his fleet die before we finish him." The human ships moved like a choreographed dance of destruction. Where Zephyrian vessels expected brute force attacks, they instead faced surgical strikes that disabled their weapons and engines while leaving life support intact. The aliens found themselves trapped in floating coffins, forced to watch as their comrades suffered the same fate. Lieutenant Commander Torres, monitoring communications from his position at the sensor station, looked up with a grim expression. "Sir, we're intercepting their distress calls. Admiral Kethvar is requesting immediate reinforcement from all sectors." "Let him call," Kane replied. "By now, every sector commander is too busy trying to save his own ships to worry about helping anyone else." The truth was even more devastating than Kane's words suggested. Across the Zephyrian Empire, simultaneous attacks were crippling their military infrastructure with terrifying efficiency. Human forces had spent months mapping every weakness, every flaw in their enemies' defenses, and now they were exploiting all of them at once. On the industrial world of Zephyria Prime, Colonel David Reyes and his Dragon Corps operatives were conducting their most audacious mission yet. While the planet's defenders focused on the obvious threat of human warships in orbit, Reyes and his team had infiltrated the world's central manufacturing complex. "Charges set on the primary fusion reactors," reported Sergeant Kim through her helmet comm. "Detonation in T-5 minutes." Reyes nodded, watching through his tactical display as his team systematically destroyed the facilities that produced the Empire's most advanced weapons. But they weren't just blowing things up randomly. Every target had been carefully selected to create maximum disruption, while appearing to be the result of sabotage by disgruntled workers or equipment failures. "Remember, people," Reyes said as they prepared for extraction, "this never happened. As far as the galaxy knows, the Zephyrian Empire is collapsing from internal problems and equipment failures. No one is going to connect these incidents to humanity." The psychological warfare aspect of the campaign was perhaps even more devastating than the military strikes. By making their attacks appear random and unconnected, humanity was creating the impression that the mighty Zephyrian Empire was simply falling apart from its own incompetence. Other alien species were beginning to whisper that perhaps the Zephyrians weren't as invincible as they had claimed. Dr. Yuki Sato's biological weapon was beginning to show its effects across Zephyrian space. Military commanders found themselves struggling to think clearly, their reaction times slowing. their ability to coordinate complex operations degrading by the day. What they didn't realize was that the weakness was spreading through their ranks like a plague, transmitted through the very food and water they consumed. Sir, Admiral Vrexkar reports that his fleet is experiencing widespread equipment failures, reported a confused Zephyrian communication officer to his increasingly desperate commander. He's requesting immediate technical support. But there was no technical support to send. The equipment failures weren't equipment failures at all. They were the result of crews who could barely function, making mistakes that seemed minor but had catastrophic consequences. Ships collided during routine maneuvers. Weapon systems fired on friendly targets due to targeting errors. Navigation computers were programmed with coordinates that sent entire fleets into empty space. Back on Earth, General Hayes watched the reports flowing in with grim satisfaction. The Zephyrian Empire was crumbling faster than even their most optimistic projections had predicted, but she felt no joy in the destruction, only a cold determination to see justice done for the 50,000 civilians who had died at New Eden. "What's the status of their civilian populations?" she asked Colonel Martinez. "Unharmed, ma'am. All strikes have been limited to military and industrial targets. The biological weapon affects only their military caste. Civilian Zephyrians have different genetic markers." Hayes nodded approvingly. This was what separated humanity from their enemies. Even in their rage, even in their pursuit of vengeance, they maintained their moral boundaries. The Zephyrians had murdered innocent civilians. Humanity would destroy their military capability while leaving their civilians untouched. It was a distinction that mattered, even if the Zephyrians couldn't understand it. Admiral Kethvar stood in his command center, surrounded by the wreckage of his once mighty empire. Reports of defeat came in from every sector, each one more devastating than the last. His fleets were scattered, his bases destroyed, his communications network compromised. The humans seemed to be everywhere at once, striking with a precision that suggested they knew his empire better than he did. "How is this possible?" he whispered, staring at the tactical display that showed human ships throughout Zephyrian space. "Our intelligence said they were primitive. Our scouts said they were weak." His aide, one of the few officers still capable of coherent thought thanks to a rare genetic variation that made him resistant to the biological weapon, spoke with the voice of dawning understanding. "Sir, I think our intelligence was wrong. I think they wanted us to think they were weak." Kethavar turned to face his subordinate, and for the first time in his life, the Zephyrian admiral felt something he had never experienced before: fear of prey that had revealed itself to be a predator. "You're saying this was planned? That they allowed us to attack their colony to justify this response?" "No, sir," the aide replied quietly. "I think they genuinely tried to be peaceful, but I think they were always capable of this. We just gave them a reason to stop pretending to be harmless." In the depths of space, human ships continued their methodical destruction of everything the Zephyrian Empire had built. They moved like dragons awakened from a long sleep, and their fire was righteous and terrible to behold. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in chaos. Representatives from dozens of species filled the great chamber on Station Harmony 7, their voices creating a cacophony of fear, confusion, and desperate speculation. The mighty Zephyrian Empire, which had dominated galactic politics for 3 millennia, was collapsing in real time, and no one understood how or why. Ambassador Talara of the Centaurian Republic stood at the central podium, her normally steady voice betraying her anxiety. "In the past 72 hours, we have lost all contact with over 60% of Zephyrian military installations. Their trade routes have gone silent, their diplomatic channels are dead, and their border worlds are reporting complete communication blackouts. Equipment failures," suggested Ambassador Korath of the Vegan Alliance, though his tone indicated he didn't believe his own words. "Even the most advanced technology can experience cascading failures. Across an entire empire? Simultaneously." Talara's response drew murmurs of agreement from around the chamber. "No, this is something else. Something coordinated." What none of them knew was that humanity had been listening to every word of their panicked deliberations. Hidden sensors placed throughout the station years ago as part of humanity's peaceful diplomatic efforts were now serving a very different purpose, allowing human intelligence to monitor the galaxy's reaction to their campaign. Ambassador Elena Rodriguez sat in her private quarters aboard the human diplomatic vessel, Peaceful Dawn, reviewing the transcripts with a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal horror. As humanity's senior diplomat, she had spent decades building relationships with these same alien species who were now scrambling to understand what was happening to their former oppressors. "Ma'am," her aide said softly, "Admiral Kane is requesting permission to begin Phase 3. Rodriguez closed her eyes, knowing what Phase 3 entailed. The systematic hunting down of every remaining Zephyrian military vessel in the galaxy, followed by the occupation of their key worlds. It would be the end of the Zephyrian Empire as a galactic power, reducing them to a single homeworld with no ability to threaten anyone ever again. "Tell the Admiral he has authorization," she said quietly, "but remind him that we maintain the civilian protection protocols. No matter what they did to us, we don't become them." Meanwhile, in the outer rim of former Zephyrian space, Captain Sarah Chen was leading a hunting expedition that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. Her task force of 12 ships was systematically tracking down the scattered remnants of the Zephyrian fleet, using sensor technology that could detect a ship's heat signature from 3 light-years away. "Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, reported her sensor officer. "Single Zephyrian destroyer attempting to reach the neutral zone. Intercept course maximum acceleration," Chen ordered. "Let's end this." The chase lasted only minutes. The Zephyrian destroyer, once a symbol of imperial might that could single-handedly conquer entire star systems, found itself surrounded by human vessels that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Its crew, weakened by the biological weapon and demoralized by weeks of watching their empire crumble, offered no resistance. "Zephyrian vessel, this is Captain Chen of the UES Vigilance," she broadcast on all frequencies. "You are ordered to surrender immediately. Your crew will be treated according to galactic conventions for prisoners of war." The response came in heavily accented standard. We surrender. Please, we surrender." Chen felt no satisfaction in the words. Each surrender was another reminder of how far humanity had fallen from their ideals of peaceful coexistence. But every time she felt regret creeping in, she remembered the images from New Eden. Children's playgrounds turned to ash, schools reduced to rubble, families who had died together because they'd had nowhere to run. Dr. Jennifer Nakamura, the alien psychology expert, was conducting interviews with captured Zephyrian officers aboard the prison ship Sanctuary. What she was learning challenged everything the galaxy thought it knew about the supposedly invincible empire. "Tell me about your military training," she said to Admiral Vrexikar, who had once commanded a fleet of 200 ships and now sat across from her in simple detention clothing. We were taught that strength was everything," he replied, his multiple eyes struggling to focus. "That weakness invited destruction. That mercy was a luxury only the strong could afford. And what do you think of that philosophy now?" Vrexikar was quiet for a long moment, his mandibles clicking softly. "I think we mistook your mercy for weakness. I think we never understood that you were strong enough to choose to be gentle. When you stopped choosing gentleness..." He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. The psychological impact of humanity's campaign was spreading far beyond the Zephyrian Empire. Other species were beginning to reassess everything. They thought they knew about the peaceful traders and explorers from Earth. The humans had demonstrated capabilities that suggested they had been holding back during every previous conflict, choosing restraint not from weakness but from strength. Ambassador Korath of the Vegan Alliance found himself reviewing decades of interactions with human diplomats, searching for signs of the deadly competence they had just revealed. How many times had humanity accepted unfavorable trade deals to avoid conflict? How many diplomatic insults had they ignored rather than escalate to violence? How many times had they chosen to walk away from fights they could have won? "They've been managing us," he realized with growing alarm. "All of us. They've been careful not to threaten anyone because they knew what would happen if we all united against them." His aide, a young Vegan named Strix, looked confused. "But sir, the humans have always been peaceful. Their entire culture is based on cooperation and mutual aid." "Is it?" Korath asked, pulling up footage of human ships systematically dismantling Zephyrian battle groups. "Or is that just what they wanted us to see? Look at this coordination, this precision. You don't develop these capabilities overnight. This is the result of centuries of preparation." Back in human space, General Hayes was coordinating the final phases of Operation Dragon's Wake. The Zephyrian Empire was broken, its military scattered, its government in complete disarray. But the operation wasn't finished until every potential threat was neutralized. Dragon Corps reports successful completion of Operation Clean Slate, Colonel Martinez announced. All Zephyrian weapons development facilities have been destroyed, and their research data has been corrupted beyond recovery. Hayes nodded grimly. What about their homeworld? Surrounded but unharmed. Admiral Kane's fleet is maintaining a defensive perimeter, but per your orders, no hostile action has been taken against civilian targets. The final irony of the campaign was that humanity's overwhelming victory had been achieved while maintaining the moral high ground. They had responded to genocide with surgical precision, destroying their enemy's ability to wage war while carefully protecting innocent lives. It was a demonstration of power that was somehow made more terrifying by its restraint. In the depths of space, the last free Zephyrian admiral sent a final message to anyone who would listen. Do not wake the dragons. Whatever you do, do not wake the dragons. The galaxy was listening, and the galaxy was learning. 6 months after the destruction of New Eden, the galaxy had settled into an uneasy new normal. The Zephyrian Empire, once the dominant military force spanning 200 star systems, had been reduced to a single world under human protection. Their former territories were either independent or under the administration of other species who had quickly moved to fill the power vacuum. Ambassador Elena Rodriguez stood before the reconvened Galactic Council, representing humanity for the first time since the campaign had begun. The Great Chamber was quieter than she had ever seen it, with representatives speaking in hushed tones and avoiding direct eye contact with the human delegation. The Human Federation wishes to address the concerns that have been raised regarding our recent military actions, Rodriguez began, her voice carrying the same diplomatic calm that had characterized human interactions for centuries. We understand that many of you have questions about our capabilities and intentions. She paused, looking around the chamber at faces that showed mixtures of fear, respect, and uncertainty. These were the same beings who had once dismissed humanity as a minor player in galactic politics, a young species that might someday become relevant. Now they hung on her every word, desperate to understand what humanity wanted from them. First, let me be clear about our position regarding the Zephyrian conflict. We did not seek war. We did not desire conquest. We responded to an act of genocide against our civilians with the minimum force necessary to ensure it could never happen again. Ambassador Talara of the Centaurian Republic raised a tentative hand. With respect, Ambassador Rodriguez, the destruction of the Zephyrian Empire hardly seems like minimum force. Their military capabilities have been completely eliminated. Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. You're absolutely correct. We eliminated their ability to commit genocide. We destroyed their capacity to attack civilian populations. We dismantled their war machine so thoroughly that they will never again pose a threat to innocent beings anywhere in the galaxy. If you consider that excessive, I would ask you to consider the alternative. The alternative hung unspoken in the air. 50,000 human civilians had died at New Eden. The mathematical precision of humanity's response had demonstrated that they could have killed billions of Zephyrians just as easily. Instead, they had chosen to destroy their enemy's military while protecting civilian lives. Dr. Jennifer Nakamura, now serving as humanity's liaison for psychological warfare studies, addressed a specialized committee later that day. Her audience consisted of military strategists and political analysts from across the galaxy, all desperate to understand how humanity had achieved such a complete victory. The key to understanding our success, she explained, lies in recognizing that we never stopped being what we were before we left Earth. Humans are pack hunters by nature. We evolved to coordinate complex group activities to share information rapidly, and to adapt our strategies based on the behavior of our prey. A vegan military analyst raised a concerned pseudopod. Are you saying that humanity views other species as prey? Not at all, Nakamura replied. Under normal circumstances, we view other species as potential packmates. We prefer cooperation to competition, mutual benefit to dominance. But when someone threatens our pack, particularly our young and defenseless members, we revert to our original nature. We become hunters. The implications were staggering. Humanity's peaceful nature wasn't a sign of weakness or evolution beyond their violent past. It was a choice they made every day, a conscious decision to suppress their predatory instincts in favor of cooperation. The Zephyrians had forced them to stop making that choice, and the results had been devastating. Captain Sarah Chen found herself assigned to a very different kind of mission in the aftermath of the war. Her ship, the UES Vigilance, was now part of a humanitarian task force helping to rebuild the worlds that had been caught in the conflict. It was strange work for someone who had spent months hunting down enemy vessels, but it felt right in a way that the fighting never had. Medical supplies delivered to Kepler 442, reported her logistics officer. The Zephyrian civilian population there is responding well to treatment. Chen nodded, watching through the view screen as human medical ships worked alongside alien crews to establish emergency hospitals. The same precision that had made humanity so deadly in warfare was now being applied to saving lives and rebuilding communities. It was a deliberate choice, she realized. Humanity was demonstrating that their capacity for destruction was matched by their capacity for creation. They wanted the galaxy to understand that what had happened to the Zephyrian military was not who they were by nature, but who they became when pushed too far. On the former Zephyrian homeworld, now simply called Zephyr under the Human Protection Accord, Admiral Kethvar found himself in the strange position of working with his former enemies to rebuild his shattered society. The biological weapon had run its course, leaving him and his people weakened but alive, dependent on human medical aid for their recovery. Why? He asked Dr. Yuki Sato during one of his medical examinations. Why spare us? Why help us rebuild? Your people could have eliminated us entirely. Sato, the same woman who had designed the weapon that had crippled his military caste, looked at him with something that might have been pity. Because that's not who we are. We're not conquerors, Admiral. We're not even particularly good at being warriors. We're builders and explorers and caretakers. You forced us to become something else for a while, but we always intended to come back to who we really are. The galaxy was watching this reconstruction effort with intense interest. Humanity could have simply walked away after their victory, leaving the Zephyrians to collapse into chaos and anarchy. Instead, they were investing significant resources in helping their former enemies build a stable, peaceful society. Other species were beginning to understand that this was humanity's true power. Not their military capabilities, impressive as those had proven to be, but their ability to transform enemies into allies, to build something better from the ashes of conflict. The trade routes that had once carried Zephyrian threats now carried human aid ships. The monitoring stations that had once watched for human expansion now coordinated relief efforts. The galaxy was learning that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their ability to destroy, but their ability to make others want to be better than they had been. Ambassador Korath of the Vegan Alliance found himself leading a delegation to Earth, something that would have been unthinkable before the war. He stood in the gardens of the human capital, watching children play among flowers that had been brought from dozens of different worlds. "This is what you were protecting," he said to Rodriguez as they walked among the peaceful scenes. "Not just your colonies, but this idea that different species can coexist and thrive together." Rodriguez smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her since the conflict began. "Every human child who plays in these gardens is the descendant of someone who fled war and violence somewhere else. We know what it means to lose everything and have to start over. We know what it means to be given a second chance." The message was clear. Humanity had given the galaxy a demonstration of what happened when their patience was exhausted and their mercy was withdrawn. But they had also shown what happened when their protection was extended and their friendship was offered. The choice of which version of humanity to deal with was up to each species individually. The dragons had awakened, shown their fire, and then chosen to go back to sleep. But the galaxy would never again mistake their slumber for weakness. 10 years had passed since the Day of Awakening, as historians had come to call it. The memorial on New Eden had been rebuilt exactly where the old colony had stood, but now it was surrounded by a thriving city populated by dozens of different species. Children who had never known war played in gardens planted by former enemies, while their parents worked together on projects that would have been impossible in the old galaxy. Ambassador Elena Rodriguez, now in her 70s and serving her final term as humanity's chief diplomatic representative, stood before the memorial wall that bore the names of 50,000 human civilians. Behind her, delegates from across the galaxy waited in respectful silence as she spoke the words that had become an annual tradition. They died believing in a galaxy where different species could coexist in peace, she said, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. They died working to build something better than what had come before. Their sacrifice was not in vain, because from their ashes grew something that even they might not have dared to imagine. The galaxy had indeed changed beyond recognition. The old power structures based on military dominance and territorial expansion had given way to a new order built on cooperation and mutual benefit. The Human Federation had emerged as the de facto mediator for interspecies conflicts, not because they had the largest fleet, but because everyone knew they had the moral authority that came from having used overwhelming power with restraint. Dr. Jennifer Nakamura, now the director of the Galactic Institute for Peaceful Relations, published her final research paper on the psychological impact of the Zephyrian War. Her conclusions had shaped diplomatic doctrine across dozens of species, creating a new understanding of how power and restraint could be combined to create lasting peace. The key insight, she wrote, is that true strength is not the ability to destroy your enemies, but the ability to choose not to. Humanity demonstrated that they possessed the capacity for total victory, and then chose to use it only to the extent necessary to protect the innocent. This paradox of power, that it becomes most effective when it is not used, has become the foundation of the new galactic order. Captain Sarah Chen, now Admiral Chen and commander of the Galactic Peacekeeping Force, maintained a mixed fleet of ships from dozens of different species. Her flagship, still the UES Vigilance, served as a symbol of how former enemies could work together for the common good. Her crew included Zephyrians whose parents had once served in the Imperial fleet, working alongside humans whose families had died in the attacks on New Eden. The irony, she often told new recruits, is that we became better at peace by becoming better at war. When everyone knows you can fight, you rarely have to. The peacekeeping force had been called upon to intervene in conflicts across the galaxy, but their presence alone was usually enough to bring hostile parties to the negotiating table. No one wanted to risk awakening the dragons again, and humanity's reputation for proportional but devastating response had become the foundation for a new kind of deterrence. On the world of New Zephyr, Admiral Kethvar served as the elected leader of his people's government. The former Imperial Admiral had spent the last decade learning about democracy, cooperation, and the radical idea that strength could be used to protect rather than dominate. His people had not only survived their empire's collapse but had thrived under human guidance, building a society that their ancestors would not have recognized. They taught us that evolution is not just biological, he said during a speech commemorating the anniversary of his species' surrender. It is also cultural, social, and moral. We were apex predators who believed that strength was the only virtue. They showed us that the strongest among us are those who choose to protect the weak. The transformation of Zephyrian society had become a model for other species struggling with their own violent histories. Humanity had proven that even the most aggressive cultures could be redirected toward peaceful ends. Given the right incentives and support, Colonel David Reyes, now retired from the Dragon Corps and serving as an instructor at the Galactic Military Academy, taught courses on what he called ethical warfare. His students came from across the galaxy, learning not just how to fight but when to fight and, more importantly, when not to fight. The goal of military action, he taught, is not victory for its own sake, but the establishment of conditions that make further military action unnecessary. Humanity learned this lesson over centuries of conflict on Earth. Our greatest generals were not those who won the most battles, but those who found ways to end wars permanently. Dr. Yuki Sato had returned to her peaceful research, but her work on biological warfare had led to breakthroughs in medical treatment that had benefited species across the galaxy. The same precision that had allowed her to design a weapon targeting only Zephyrian military castes had enabled the development of personalized medical treatments that could adapt to the unique biology of each species. Knowledge can be used to harm or to heal, she said, during her acceptance speech for the Galactic Peace Prize. The choice of how to use it defines who we are as beings, and ultimately as a civilization. The galaxy had learned to see humanity not as conquerors or destroyers, but as gardeners who occasionally had to pull weeds to protect their flowers. The metaphor had become popular among diplomatic circles, describing humanity's role as the species that maintained the conditions necessary for others to flourish. As the memorial ceremony concluded, representatives from across the galaxy placed flowers and tokens of remembrance at the base of the wall. Zephyrians laid crystalline formations that glowed with soft light. Vegans contributed living sculptures that would grow and change over the coming years. Centaurians offered geometric patterns that told stories in mathematical beauty. Rodriguez watched the display with satisfaction, tinged by sadness. The 50,000 names on the wall would never be forgotten, but their deaths had purchased something precious, a galaxy where such tragedies had become unthinkable. "Ma'am," her aide said quietly, "the transport to Earth is ready when you are." Rodriguez nodded, taking one last look at the memorial and the thriving city beyond it. Tomorrow she would retire to her home on Earth, ending a career that had spanned the greatest transformation in galactic history. But she left knowing that the work would continue, that the principles they had fought for would endure. The dragons slept peacefully now, surrounded by friends rather than enemies. But the galaxy would always remember that they could wake if needed, and that knowledge had become the foundation for a peace that might truly last. In the end, the Zephyrians had indeed awakened dragons. They had just learned too late that dragons, when treated with respect and kindness, preferred to dream of gardens rather than battlefields.